Hi, hello everyone. Welcome back. Sorry for that small technical hitch that we had. I hope it won't impact your enjoyment too much. Tommy and I were chatting about his International Women's Day and the very strong and, as he said, strident women in his life, and how much they have supported and encouraged him and his development. So let's go back and find out more about the women in Tommy's life and the impact they have had on his growth and development.
Hi, John. As I was saying there, my mother was a big influence on me politically as we were growing up. She was a trade unionist first and foremost, but she also got involved in an early day in what was called the battered wives movement, John. And as a kid, we used to receive calls to the house, and I was always worried because my mum was having to go out to visit other women. And I didn't know what was going on at the time. I just knew that it was quite dangerous and that I was quite upset with my mum. You get a sense of things. As I got older, I realised that what was happening was that she was going out to try and remove women from abusive situations because in those days they didn't have any refuge. Um, that was one of the biggest problems for women in those days because whenever anybody would say, "Oh, why don't you just walk out if a guy's abusing you?" Well, it's easier said than done if you've got nowhere to walk out to. So what my mum did is she got involved with the Transport and Junior Workers Union and got them to help fund the first ever refuge for women in Scotland. And that movement, the battered wife movement, went on to become known as Women's Aid, and obviously is very active and unfortunately essential across Scotland today. So my mum's always been a strong influence politically, um, and my two sisters are great fighters against injustice and are professionals themselves, both of them in social work. And of course, my wife, whom I met at school at Lourdes Secondary School in Glasgow, when I always thought she was way out my league because she was so pretty and good looking. She always wore her uniform perfectly. But she came from Cardonald, I came from Pollock, and there was a kind of feeling inferiority complex on my part that she was for the sort of a better off area in those days. But she is such a fighter. She worked for British Airways for over 25 years, and in that role, she was the elected shop steward and represented her fellow workers. In fact, led 3 different strikes against British Airways for improved working conditions and wages. So she's a very tenacious woman who has got huge principles, um, trade union principles, and a massive independent supporter. What she does say to me often, John, is the big issue for me that she doesn't feel gets addressed enough within the independence movement, and I tend to have some sympathy with her, is the issue of the monarchy. Gail is very much someone who believes that if we're ever going to build a new and a better country, it has to be a country where we're all equals. And how can you start off with that basis if you've got a monarchy and a royal family that are above the rest of us? In other words, she wants a country of citizens, not of subjects, and I'm very much with her on that. So I've got very strong female influences in my life and have had them in all of my life. So it's personally, I think it's wrong that we have only one day as International Women's Day. Every day should recognise and respect the role that women play in society.
It's been a real challenge for women to deal with some of the issues in society. What is it, in your view? What is it that makes men behave the way that they do that caused your mother to have so much time and effort to try and counter? Because you could say, where does it all stem from? This notion that somebody can beat up their partner. Where do you think that comes from?
it's a deep sociological question, John, and it doesn't lend itself to a short answer. That's for sure. There have been many books and dissertations written that try to get to the bottom of why men abuse women. I think it's an imbalance in power relationships. I do think it's a product of patriarchy and the way our society is built. It's something that we all have to challenge. At the end
Does
of the
it come
day,
from the school
it's
system, do you
about
think,
power.
Tommy? Do you think it's
Sorry,
something
John.
that boys learn at school? Because it's hard to believe that mothers would encourage their sons to think that hitting women was somehow acceptable. So is it something in our educational system perhaps that's flawed and faulty that doesn't address this?
John, I remember reading a report, and I think it was about 4 or 5 years ago, that was shocking to me because I think it said something like 1 in 3 youngsters who had been polled at school thought that it was acceptable to hit a female. And I mean, when I was younger, these issues I think were less talked about, but seemed to be more prevalent. As I got older, I thought they were more talked about and less prevalent. But maybe I'm wrong. Maybe I'm just not aware of what's going on. Sometimes, we have a lot of work and energy goes into women's spaces and working with women, empowering women, all of which is dead important. But we have to address the elephant in the room, and that is that working with women isn't going to solve the problems. It's working with men, because men are the abusers primarily. And I know no one needs to tell me that there are some cases of females abusing men. We know that happens, but
Yeah.
primarily we're talking about male abuse of women, and therefore we have to, at an early age, tackle at school attitudes to women, respect for women. Um, I I think of things. I've got a 16-year-old daughter now, John, and I sometimes think of the prism in her life and think about how things were different to me. And there's a sort of a glib example. One of her favourite shows is a show called Modern Family, which is an American sitcom
Sure.
show, which features a family of two gay men married, a family of an older male and a younger female married, and then a so-called traditional family with two children. Now,
Yeah.
the reason I raise this, John, is what that type of show does to me, and what it certainly does for her and her friends, is it normalizes a lot of things that in my life weren't normal. Being gay when I was growing up, you were a pariah, and it was a form of abuse. You used derogatory terms like poof or hoofda, or things which were unkind to say the least. And that's the way it was then. It bloody wrong. It's not, I don't think, the same. I'm not saying there's not discrimination, of course there is. I do think there's less social acceptance of these things. It's a bit like, John, and I'm jumping back and forth with examples here, but growing up, driving without a seatbelt was something you did. Even driving with alcohol in your blood was something that was people did. Nowadays, driving with alcohol or driving without a seat, it's frowned upon. It's socially unacceptable. That's what we have to make violence against women. We have to make it socially unacceptable. We can't have pub conversations that revolve around somebody abusing a woman and talking about it as if it's acceptable. So I personally think some things have improved. I do think many more women feel empowered than they did when my sisters were growing up, but we still have a big distance to go. And all you have to do is look at the continuing wage gap to see that we still have a big distance to go as far as women and equality is concerned. But to me, it can't just be a fight for women. It has to be a fight that men engage in as well alongside women. There are times when women have to fight on their own and maybe need their own spaces. But
Yeah.
I do think we need unity in that battle because it's about equality and justice.
I think everyone watching tonight is probably going to agree with you. It's just a great pity this has persisted for quite so long. Uh, and we've had a woman first minister for a number of years, but yet we still have this issue. But hopefully it will get addressed more successfully. Callum Holland is asking, does Tommy think his fears about devolution in '98 have come true? And does he think without Holyrood we'd be independent already?
No, I don't think that, Callum. I actually think the Parliament in '99, in many ways, has probably assured the eventual, and I'm as angry and impatient as anyone about the lack of progress. But I do think we're eventually going to get an independent country, and I'll tell you why and why I say that. Again, if I compare my daughter and myself, and I look at life and over the last couple of generations, my daughter now talks about Scotland, talks about Scottish politics, talks about the legislative practices of the Scottish Parliament in a way that when I was growing up, there was no focus on Scotland at all. We didn't, in our modern studies, we didn't talk about Scotland or Scottish independence.
Mm.
It wasn't part of our environment, our political environment. Now, and I think it's the reason why so many young people are so way ahead of the rest of the population as far as support for independence. Now, I think young people see it as logical, as normal, as the equilibrium in society should be that the place that you live in is the place that takes the decisions that affect your life, and that means independence. The reasons behind the current SNP leadership dragging its heels so much are, I think, almost politically criminal because the need for independence is greater now than ever. Yeah, sure, we needed it in 14, but in 14, some of you will recall that we used to have the unionists accuse us of scaremongering whenever we raised the prospect of a right wing Tory government, a government that was bereft of any support for the National Health Service, that would continue the policies of cutting the taxes for the rich and increasing the burden for the poor, and of course, in a context of the European Union that would drag the UK out of the European Union for the wrong reasons, not because it wanted to improve the economy or improve control of certain affairs, but because it was anti-immigration. It was a racist under, undermining of the European Union. So from my point of view, we used to listen to that in 14 and raise it as a prospect, and people would say, you're just scaremongering. Well, I'm sorry, it's all came to pass. The situation we have within the UK is now a prospect of an either deeply right wing government or just a right wing government. I mean, there is no
It, it,
prospect of
it's
social
interesting.
justice, social equality.
It's interesting to
It's
say that,
a
Tommy, and
horrible
I think
Hobson's
you're,
choice.
you're probably echoing the thoughts of many people in the audience tonight. But nonetheless, and despite the fact that your daughter feels the way she does, and I expect, based upon the opinion polls, that many of her the people at her level in education feel the same way too. Nonetheless, the opinion polls are still tied 50-50. Now,
Yeah,
that
John,
suggests that it would be a close run thing
I,
if there was a
I think
referendum
that's,
tomorrow.
John, I think there's two things to say about that. Number one is I would take 50-50. I, I, I would love 50-50 because if you go back and examine in 2013 the Scotsman opinion poll, the social attitude survey that was promoted in The Guardian, we were sitting around 23%, 23% support for independence. In the course of a campaign, an electric campaign that took the message to communities all over Scotland, we went from 23 to 45. Now, if we start at 50, I'm absolutely confident we'll go over 60. Absolutely. Once the issues are explained and the campaign gets kicked off. Because right now, at the time, if you remember, around about 18 and 19, when there was talk of a new referendum, I mean, we were told by Ian Blackford and others that it was next year. 2018 was going to be 19. Then 2019 was going to be 20. But we kept getting told that. There were 18 opinion polls in succession that gave us a majority. 18 opinion polls in succession gave us a majority. It's only when it's been off the agenda, where it's been quite clear the SNP's postponed the whole issue, that the opinion polls have started to narrow again. Why? Because I don't think it's a priority for a lot of people, because they don't think it's going to happen. So once you get it back on the agenda, John, I mean, the fact that we've stayed at 50%, I think is brilliant, absolutely brilliant. But once it goes back on the agenda, now what's going to take to get it on the agenda is another question, another debate. But once it goes back on the agenda, I think we will romp home.
Are you of the opinion, Tommy, that a referendum is the right way to approach this? Bearing in mind,
I was in relation to the post-14 situation that we were in, John. And in those days, excuse me for being so naive, but I actually believed that the SNP leadership were as much enthusiastic about independence as I am. I believe that they were looking for the next best opportunity to hold Indy Ref 2. I thought after 16, and particularly the fact that Scotland voted one way, England voted another, and it meant that Scotland was taken out of the European Union, I thought that would be the basis upon which the SNP would put in their manifesto commitments into practice. And they said if there was a fundamental change in affairs, then that would mean there would be a new referendum. There was a fundamental change, but they did nothing. They talked about it, but they did nothing. There was no preparations done. Naively, I thought that they were preparing the ground and that things would happen in 17. And then I thought things would happen in 18. And then I think things would happen in 19. And I marched, as hundreds of thousands of us did, all over Scotland, thinking that it was going to be one final push and we were going to get there. The truth is, I don't think the current SNP leadership are committed to holding a new referendum at all.
Sorry, my question was, do you believe that a referendum is the right way to go?
Well, John, what I'm now going to therefore say is that because they are not committed to that road and that tactic, and that's all it was a tactic. It's not the be all and end all. It's a tactic. I think there is a case, because there is a two SNPs, isn't there? You know, there's the SNP pre 2014 and there's the SNP post 2014. And the SNP pre 2014 had a very, very clear idea of how independence was gained, and that is you gain it democratically. You win a majority at a Westminster election for independence, and if you send more MPs to Parliament than any of the Unionists, then you have your basis to begin the break-up talks. That's what Thatcher said, if you think about it. Even, you know, as far back as that, she used to lecture the 4 or 5 SNP MPs at the time. If you want your independence, it's very simple. Just send a majority of MPs to this Parliament and you can have it. Well, we, I think, have to return to that now. I'm sorry to say this, because I would love to believe that 2023 there's going to be a referendum, and some people still believe that.
Sorry, Tommy, how would that work?
SNP still believe that.
How would that work? So there's an election. Let's assume that the scenario is that the SNP, actually, it's not an extraordinary hypothesis, this, because of the most recent opinion poll, which I wrote about in the Sunday National a couple of weeks ago, said categorically that the Tories would lose, and Labour, the Tories and Labour would lose all their seats in Scotland, and the Tories would lose all their seats in Wales. So the Tories would become a one-nation party. That was what the poll said. Are you saying that in these circumstances, that would be a mandate? Nothing else would be required?
John, as long as it's clear, and this is the big if, as long as it's clear in the SNP manifesto or the other independence parties that fight the election that when you are voting for SNP or any other pro-independence party, what you are voting for is to remove ourselves from the unequal, unfair British Union. What we keep getting told is a voluntary union. 1707, it was apparently a voluntary union. The fact that nobody outside the small coterie of very privileged parliamentarians knew anything about it is forgotten about. But we're told it was a voluntary union. Well, we want to voluntarily withdraw from that union. And as long as you win the election on that basis, and the unionists can fight tooth and nail against that, that's their prerogative. If we win that election on that basis, then that to me is the beginning of the negotiations. And the SNP leaders or Alba or whoever else is in that position has to have the balls, has to have the courage to say, we are starting the talks if we win the election. We can't win another election, John, and then say, oh, right, we've won an election. That means we've got the basis for a Section 30. I'm sorry, that particular ship will have sailed by then. If we don't use it before the next election, then let's forget it.
So just a point of detail. I think the 1707 union was an incorporating union. That's the big mistake that was made. Because once you sign up for an incorporating union, you sign up for a very different creature. And it makes it tougher to argue the voluntary nature of that. Can we just take...
Yes, but
if
you think about it, John, not only was it still a voluntary union, the point you're making about we agreed to give up our national identity because those privileged few who at the time ran our affairs thought they'd ran our affairs into the ground in relation to debt and the whole Darien scheme and everything that goes along with it. But we've got to remember that whole agreement was then rearranged in 1801 in relation to Ireland's incorporation. So you're talking about a change voluntary agreement. So these agreements, and if you look at the current Northern Ireland Act, John, and the detail is there in black and white, that you're allowed a referendum every 7 years. It's there in the Northern Ireland Act.
Yeah, the reality too is that the Act of Union only failed to be overturned by 4 votes, scarcely a couple of years after it was signed. So there's been a concern in Scotland about the nature of the union, almost from its very inception.
Yes.
I want to ask you a different question, though, if I may. We've got a situation here where, let's say I'm not a member of the SNP, I'm not a member of any political party, and I'm now riven, I can put it to you this way, because Alaba will be fielding candidates, the SNP will be fielding candidates. Surely the end result of that is that the independence vote is split, and the likelihood of these polls, which I mentioned earlier, being realised is significantly reduced. Either Alaba has no support, significant support, and therefore it's a non-issue, or Alaba has significant support. In that case, the independence movement is split, and other people get in as a result of that. How would you comment on that?
John, it's a very real problem. It's a very real situation that has to be confronted. The truth is, Alba's only there because the SNPs failed to act on the multiple mandates that the people of Scotland gave it. If the SNP had acted on any of the 4 clear mandates that it was given, then Alba wouldn't exist. The truth is, they've let us down. They've refused to take up the cudgels and enforce their mandates. So there needs to be something that you can't just allow people to effectively deceive you. Vote for us and you'll get independence. Yeah, okay, then I'll do that in 2015. Vote for us, you'll get independence. Okay, I'll do it in 2016. Vote for us, you'll get independence. Okay, I'll do it in 2017. Vote for us, you'll get independence. Okay, I'll do it in 2019. Vote for us, you'll get independence. Okay, I'll do it in 2020. Come on, where does it stop? Where do we stop and say, hey, wait a wee minute, we've been voting for you and voting for you and voting for you, and you've still no give us the independence that we thought we were voting for? Now, you are willing to prioritise Gender Recognition Act, you're willing to fight very, very strongly for a very minority view. You are willing to give us all sorts of excuses and reasons why you're delaying referendums. I mean, I can't understand the logic, John, of someone who believes in independence thinks we can recover from COVID without independence, because recovering from
But
COVID surely means a
I,
new
I,
life and
I
a new
got it.
society.
I got it. But you're a member of Alaba. You've joined Alaba. Is that right?
Yes, John. I joined Alaba very, very soon after it was launched.
You had an alternative, it seems to me. I'm being devil's advocate here because I want to understand this. You could have joined the SNP. It's a membership organisation, and you could have fought for your point of view inside the SNP to change SNP policies, to change the structures of the SNP, the personnel, whatever you wanted to do. You could have done that from inside. Wasn't that an alternative?
John, I'm going to take issue with you on that one, not because I've got personal knowledge of that, but because of the number of people whom I've spoken to who were in the SNP and left precisely because there was no forum any longer to influence policy, to influence decision. What they told me was that the SNP had become a very Stalinistic organisation, an organisation that did not encourage debate or discussion. Dissent was frowned upon. Anyone who raised an alternative point of view in terms of tactics was effectively put into a political purdah. And from that point of view, that idea that that was a route to pursue independence, I think is just wrong. That's my understanding of it. I can't tell you personally, but I'm talking about Kenny McCaskill, a former justice minister, for goodness sakes. It's not as if he's somebody that's wet behind the ears. Tells me that the democratic structures of the SNP have been demolished.
Okay, well, I'll put that question to him directly in a few weeks' time when he's on the show. And I'll also put the same point to Tommy Shepherd. He's on in 2 weeks' time. I'll ask him. I'll ask both of them to address that point, if I may. I want to move us on because we lost a wee bit of time tonight, unfortunately. What's your? I mean, people are looking at the pictures from Ukraine, and they've been shocked and horrified. I mean, a maternity hospital apparently was blown up this afternoon. A lot of people at the public prints are suggesting that Putin is a monster. What's your take on the situation in Ukraine?
Well, my take on the situation in Ukraine is not simplistic and it's not straightforward, John. I am not a flag waver for the Ukraine. I don't think that the current situation has happened out of the blue. I don't believe that Putin is a monster or a tyrant or a latter-day Hitler. On the contrary, I believe that what has happened has been premeditated and manufactured by the United States of America through NATO and continually goading Russia. They promised in '91, when the Soviet Union agreed to effectively collapse, that there would not be an inch eastward as far as expansion of NATO was concerned. Since then, 30 separate countries eastward have joined NATO. NATO has, in 2008, announced that it would like to see Georgia and Ukraine join NATO. And for many, many Russians, that's the line in the sand. That's the step too far, because they well remember that the route that the Nazis took from Germany to invade Russia was via Ukraine. And some of you will also be aware that the Ukraine decided to set up a puppet supportive government during that period as well to effectively support the Nazi regime. So the Russians, who lost 20 million of their citizens fighting the Nazis,
Sorry, Tommy,
to have another invasion. So
NATO
they feel threatened, John.
Are you comparing NATO with Nazis? Is that what you're doing?
Oh, in terms of war crimes, absolutely, John, absolutely. The invasion of Iraq was a war crime, John. It was a war crime that was perpetrated by NATO. The invasion of Libya, the bombing of Libya. If you read the 2016 UK Parliament report, it tells you in black and white that the whole scenario that was painted about the need to bomb Libya was a tissue of lies. It was an illegal regime change, as it was in Iraq. We're coming up to an anniversary, John. You're old enough to remember. Some of the viewers won't be, but we're coming up to an anniversary of another occasion when Europe was engulfed with bombs and refugees. On the 24th of March, 1999, 23 years ago, the NATO alliance, without a single shred of legality, decided to bomb Serbia. And for 78 days continuous, dropped well over 23,000 bombs and 10,000 sorties, and bombed hospitals and schools and churches. We were told then, I don't know if you remember it, John, I'm sure you do, but we were told then that Slobodan Milosevic was a tyrant, was a latter-day Hitler, was evil. And the justification for the NATO bombing was because a Holocaust was being carried out against the Kosovo and Kosovans, and therefore we had to take out this tyrant. John, your viewers will tonight hopefully remember some of that. What they won't remember is that Slobodan Milosevic was found not guilty at the International Hague of any war crimes. The International Hague has tried Slobodan Milosevic twice. He died in a cell. He was exonerated. He was found not guilty of any war crimes. How many of your readers or viewers have heard that? Why has that not been emblazoned the same way the butcher of the Balkans? Remember, he was called the butcher of the Balkans. How come we've not heard that? In other words, John, I think we have to be very, very careful about the manufacturing of news, about the narrative and how it's manipulated, about who's evil and who's not evil. I ask people to think critically about everything that's happening. I don't have any time or any reason to promote Vladimir Putin. Vladimir Putin and me, our politics are different. I'm a socialist, he's not. So I don't want to be a apologist for Putin. But if you dare to raise a doubt about the fact that the Ukraine regime was put there after a 2014 coup that America was involved in organising alongside Nazis, openly Nazis. The Azov battalion is a Nazi battalion. They marched through the streets of Ukraine calling for the extermination of Jews, of Gypsies, and of Russians. They infest the Ukraine regime. Now, if I dare to say that, and if there's evidence for it, anyone that wants to read my blog, I'll provide the evidence, I provide the links, go and look for it yourself. People like Oliver Stone, it's wonderful when Oliver Stone's making award-winning films about the Vietnam War. He's applauded as this fantastic libertarian who exposes untruths and lets the world know what's really going on. Then he makes Ukraine on Fire in 2016. He makes Revealing Ukraine in 2019. And it reveals the Nazi nature of the Ukraine regime. But he's criticised as an apologist.
Hold on a second, Tony. My understanding that the present president of Ukraine is Jewish.
Yeah. And
are you suggesting he's a Jewish Nazi?
But I talk to you there is so what? You know, Margaret Thatcher was a woman. What did she do for women? I mean, come on, John. That's flimsy, brother. That's flimsy.
Sorry, are you saying? Let me get this right now. Are you suggesting that a Jewish president wants to see himself destroyed? Is that what you're saying?
A Jewish president who is in power because the United States put him there. If you go onto Twitter tonight, you'll see pictures, verified pictures of Israeli battalions who have flown to join in the battle in Ukraine, waving their Israeli flags. They don't see the contradiction in the fact that the neo-Nazis that they'll be fighting alongside want to destroy Jews. The first and foremost enemy of these people is Russia itself, the existence of Russia, and they are being manipulated and promoted by the United States of America, John.
Let's assume everything that you say is absolutely spot on. Do you sincerely believe that the best way to handle these things is to invade and blow up schools and goodness knows what else?
Absolutely not. Absolutely not, John. But what I'm answering is the Joe Biden line of this is an unprovoked and unjustified invasion. He's lying. He knows he's lying. Go and look what he said way back in 2008 when he admitted the only thing that would provoke the Russia would be Ukraine joining NATO. He said that in 2008, and now he says, "Oh, that there's no provocation."
But let's just move on. You're telling us that it was not an unprovoked invasion; it was a provoked invasion. So at the end of the day, whether it's provoked or unprovoked, there has to be a settlement. Now, is the desirable settlement, in your opinion, that Russia occupies Ukraine, or would you prefer that there is a peace conference at which these things are worked out? And would you prefer jaw to war?
Of course. Any socialist worth their salt has to prefer talking to war, because in wars, who dies? It's working class people that die. It's no Putin and his closest advisors. It's no Biden and his closest advisors. It's ordinary people that suffer during war. And that's why we should all collectively abhor war and oppose war. But what I'm not prepared to do, John, is to accept the West narrative that there is no justification, that there was no provocation, that Russia has acted irrationally as an evil
you made that point.
Because they do, in their mind, they do have a justification. We might not believe that, but that's their justification.
I got it. You made that point a number of times. Thank you. What I'm trying to understand as best I can with you is what do you think the likely outcome is going to be?
I think there'll be a reconfiguration of Ukraine. I don't believe that the borders of Ukraine as it currently is will continue. I believe that, for instance, the Donetsk Republic, the Lugansk Republic in Donbass, Crimea itself is never going back. They're already reconfiguring Ukraine. There's no way that those republics are going to be anything other than reinforced. I believe that Russia will try and develop a buffer strategy where the reconfiguration of Ukraine goes further west and nearer to Belarus, nearer to Poland, and that they have more control of some of the strategic parts of Ukraine, and that they this is what they will try to do in any talks that are brokered in the future. They try to get guarantees of the neutrality of Ukraine, because they will see Ukraine as the gateway to the door of Russia. And the idea that they should allow a militarized NATO member on their doorstep is something that they fear. And the reason I mentioned earlier the whole Slobodan Milosevic example, John, is we're not talking here about a creche. We're not talking about a bowling club. We're talking about the most militarized organization on the planet that has got forum for it, bombing Libya illegally, bombing Serbia illegally, supporting the war in Iraq illegally. So this isn't some puppy organization. This is a bloodthirsty organization.
Thank you. I want to take up a couple of questions, if I may. One is, one questioner said, if Tommy is correct, why have all the United Nations countries condemned the invasion?
Well, again, whoever has said that, and I'm sorry to make this point, but they're just misinformed. Because all of the United Nations countries haven't condemned it.
Okay.
I mean, China hasn't condemned it. India hasn't condemned it. So it's just wrong. Venezuela hasn't condemned it. Cuba hasn't condemned it. Countries that have been at the end, the opposite end. People talk about how terrible the occupation is. Where were those same people talking about the occupation of Palestine, John?
Okay.
Because Israel's illegally occupying Palestine, has done for the best part of 28 years now.
Thank you.
The hypocrisy in this debate is
I
absolutely
understand that.
rancid.
And again, you made that point. I want to move us on though, because the same questioner is saying, isn't Georgia a sovereign nation? Don't they have the right to join NATO if they so wish?
Yeah, it's a great point that sovereign nations should have the right to do whatever they wish. And that's what Russia will say in their defence. They will say that they've got the right to do whatever is in their interest to defend their sovereignty. And they see Georgia becoming a NATO member, Ukraine becoming a NATO member. NATO, remember, as I say, it's not a bowling club. It's a very aggressive military alliance. Russia sees it as a threat, and the whole of the international community knows that they see it as a threat. Everyone knows that. So let's get talking real politics here instead of talking nonsense. We all know that what's behind this invasion is that Russia has been threatened and goaded. I don't support invasions because innocent people die during them. But I'm not going to say that there's no justification for it.
Got it. Putin, in his speech about a week or so ago, said that his interests were not just in the Ukraine. He wanted to deal with the Baltic states and Finland too, because he felt that they were also a threat to Russia.
John, I read his speech in detail, brother, because I was writing a blog last week, and I read the absolute detail. And I'm going to say you've misrepresented what he said. He never said he was going to deal with Finland. That's just wrong. He never said that at all. Finland, if as you'll be aware, has never attempted to join NATO and has always maintained a neutrality of sorts. So that it's just scaremongering, John. It's just not true.
So he never mentioned Finland in his speech?
Yes, of course he mentioned Finland. He mentioned Finland as one of the border countries, but not as you said. He said he was going to deal with Finland. You'll need to show me it, John, because the script I read didn't have that in it.
And did he mention the Baltic states as well?
Of course he mentioned the fact that the Baltic states, against the agreement that the US made with the old Soviet Union, that they wouldn't, and the quote was, and it's there, if you go and check the national documents, you will see they agreed that there would not be an inch expansion eastward. Well, the inclusion of many of the Baltic states within NATO absolutely negated that agreement. That's the big problem we're dealing with here. We're not dealing with two nice individuals who are having a wee debate. We're talking about very aggressive alliances in a country that fears it's going to be invaded, a country that believes it's got an existential threat on its border because it believes that NATO is a deadly military alliance. And I believe they've got every right to believe it's a deadly military alliance because its history in the last couple of decades show that it's willing to illegally bomb and invade other sovereign countries.
Okay, so we have a situation where Russia has invaded a sovereign country because it's worried about its own security. And presumably it regards that invasion as entirely legitimate.
They will regard that as entirely legitimate, John, from their point of view, and I'm sure you're aware of this, and hopefully all the viewers are aware of this, and that is that there has been a declaration of war between Ukraine and Russia since 2014. This isn't something new. The invasion's new, but the war's not new. Some of you hopefully will be aware that the bombing in the Donbass region has claimed 14,000 lives, John. 14,000 Ukrainian lives. Russian speaking primarily, but Ukrainian lives. Now, I didn't see the outcry. Maybe I wasn't watching. I didn't see the outcry about those loss of innocent lives. So from that point of view, we have to try and bring a bit of balance into the debate.
So I just want to mention a housekeeping thing. Because we lost a bit of time at the beginning, folks, we're going to extend the show tonight. If you're willing, Tommy, the 10 minutes that we lost, we're going to add on to the end. Are you happy to stick with us?
Yeah, sure.
Excellent, thank you. So we're going to extend the show tonight, folks, because we don't want to deprive you of the 10 minutes that you lost. And I'm sure, like me, you're very much enjoying what Tommy has to say. So we're going to press on, and hopefully you can stay with us. I want to ask you about the. So there's an invasion going on, but am I right in thinking that Ukraine has never actually invaded Russia?
Well, Ukraine has never invaded Russia. Why would they, John? They used to be part of the Soviet Union. They used to be an incorporated republic within the Soviet Union. Why would they ever do that? However, the links between Russia and Ukraine are long and deep and very, very historical, particularly the shared culture, the shared language. One of the first things you'll be aware, one of the first things that the puppet government that was installed by the US after the coup that saw hundreds of innocent people killed, and all investigations so far have pointed to the United States involvement and manufacturing of that coup. And there are, if you go and watch Ukraine on Fire, go and watch Revealing Ukraine, and you will see documented evidence of the US involvement in sponsoring and organising that coup. But what the first thing they did was they banned the Russian language. They banned the right to speak the Russian language. Now, if that's not an aggressive and a racist thing to do, I don't know what is.
Well, it sounds aggressive. It doesn't sound terribly racist. I mean,
to ban someone's language within a country, you don't think that's racist?
Well, there's a whole bunch of reasons why
that's what they did to us, John. The English tried that, didn't they? When they banned the Gaelic, you know. So I consider that racist.
If Scotland was independent tomorrow, would you advocate that it ought to leave NATO as part of the?
Absolutely. Yeah. Well, how could you possibly believe in a non-nuclear Scotland but be a member of a nuclear organisation? It's just stupid, isn't it?
Is that Alba's policy?
I believe that Alba is discussing that at its next conference. It's certainly a non-nuclear party, similar to the SNP, although the SNP narrowly, as you know, voted to overturn years of policy about leaving NATO. I think that was a conference about 5 or 6 years ago, which strikes me as incredibly illogical.
So the SNP believes in independence, but staying within the NATO alliance. Alba, you think, might be discussing the possibility of a policy to leave NATO.
The specifics. Alba is a very new party, as you know, John, and I believe that there is moves to set up a group of Alba members, including people like Craig Murray, former ambassador, who's got a lot of international links and international understanding, to look at our international policies generally. I would certainly be someone who stridently, I spoke about this at a conference about other issues, and I spoke about the need to call out NATO for what it is, which is a very aggressive military alliance, and it's not a peaceful organisation. So why you would want to be a member of it is beyond me, if you genuinely believe in peace.
So what is the present Alba policy? Is it to stay in or leave?
I don't think they have one, is the truth of the matter, John. You can ask Kenny. You're speaking to someone who's just a mere hireling. I'm low down the pecking order. You've got the deputy leader coming on in a couple of weeks. I would have thought it's much better to address those questions to him.
I'll ask him. And by the way, if you bump into Craig Murray, could you please repeat our invitation for him to come on the show? Because we'd love to have him come on and talk about some of these issues, plus a range of things. Now, Tommy, you've been described as a firebrand. Do you still regard yourself as a firebrand?
I don't even know what it means, John.
That's just why I asked you.
The truth is, it's part and parcel of the lazy media shorthand description of individuals that wants to simplify everything. We've got a process that's been going on for many, many years where we try and dilute politics, we try and undermine complex issues and make them into slogans instead of trying to have mature adult discussions about things. If being a firebrand means that you have got strong beliefs, then I would have thought everybody's a firebrand.
Yeah, good answer. If you're a magic wand right now, and you could strike it in the table in front of you, assuming there is a table in front of you, and you could bring about changes, what are the top 3 changes you would like to see happen as a result?
Well, obviously, the eradication of poverty, John, has got to be the number one aim. I find it incredible that we have got so many wars and conflicts going on across our planet. We've talked a lot tonight about Ukraine, but we've not talked about Somalia, we've not talked about Yemen, we've not talked about Palestine, or at least I've not got a chance to talk about it in detail. Yet these are conflicts which are killing thousands and thousands of people, mostly poor people. And the root cause is in my opinion, is a desire for big nations to build empires rather than share their wealth. The wealth in our planet just now is more than enough to give everyone a decent standard and quality of life. And yet, what we want to do is spend more and more on weapons of mass destruction, but less and less in food and food production and proper shelter for people, gainful employment for people. So this magic wand is going to be used to solve poverty by redistributing the massive wealth that we already have and by introducing sustainable forms of economic development and production, which means that we don't destroy our planet while we try and maintain and feed our planet. So it has to be in a sustainable way that we redistribute our wealth. And this isn't beyond our abilities. If we can send men and women to the moon, then surely we can solve poverty.
Isn't it the case, though, that over centuries, large countries, nations, empires have conducted themselves this way? I mean, the British Empire, the French Empire, the American Empire, as far as Vietnam's concerned, they've all exhibited the same approach. The Roman Empire, you can go back through the ages, Persian Empire, they've always been expansionists. They've always wanted to say, look, the empire comes first. Everyone else is subordinate to that great goal or aim. It seems almost to be part of the human condition when you get large nations or large empires to behave very badly. It's not new.
Absolutely right. Historically, John, you're absolutely spot on, but just as empires have always misbehaved, there's always been individuals and movements who have tried to challenge those empires, whether it be the slave revolt against the Roman Empire or whether it be Che Guevara and Fidel Castro in '59 in Cuba or whether it be the Sandinistas movement in Nicaragua. We know, you know, that the American empire is the most deadly of all the empires. Its role in Chile in '73, its role in Vietnam that you've already mentioned, its role in El Salvador has been nothing other than brutal and bloody. That's what the American empire represents. For me, being a supporter of independence makes you an anti-imperialist. It makes you an anti-colonialist because for me, Scotland being part of the UK is part of that empire. I don't want to be part of that empire any longer. I want to break from that empire. I want Scotland to be an independent nation. That's what makes me an anti-colonialist.
Okay, thank you. Well, we've got about 3 minutes to go, and we were talking about 3 things that you would like to see happen. You've dealt with one of them. What are the other 2?
Well, one of the other two has to be disarmament, John, and they kind of go hand in hand, because if you've got a world that is more concerned about feeding people than killing people, then you've got a world that will use the massive resources and the skill base to build new incubators and new ways of saving lives rather than new ways of taking lives. And that means that disarmament on a world scale takes place, and it has to start somewhere, which is why Scotland, the independent nation, has to completely and utterly reject Trident from our shores. If London still wants it, then let them have it in the Thames. I would rather the people of England rise up to get rid of it as well, instead of using up so much resources. So nuclear disarmament across the world, and disarmament in relation to other weapon systems, would also be something which I think we have to promote and ensure that we campaign for.
Okay.
So
And your third thing?
that would be my second. I suppose my third, John, would be that we open up our education system so that everyone gets the opportunity to have the first class education that unfortunately the minority currently pay for through their private schools and their Oxbridge universities. I would like to see all children get the chance to realise the inherent talents that they have, whether that be academic, whether it be cultural, musical, or whether it be a skill based. But we need to nurture our children and give them the chances in life that unfortunately far too many are denied.
Yeah. Terrific. Thanks, Tommy. I really much appreciate it. It's been, as always with these shows, they're educational and entertaining in equal measure. It's been great. Let me just say a few words in wrapping up. And again, just a brief apology to everyone for the small technical hitch that we had tonight. Something, big thanks to Tommy tonight, because it's rare we get a chance to have a debate like this. I've greatly enjoyed it, and a big thank you to him. And a big thank you to all of you for joining us tonight. I hope you've enjoyed this TNT show. As always, we have a formidable list of guests lined up for future shows. And this is the place for the big hitters, as you've seen tonight. Remember, Indie Live What's On guide, go to the indielive.net and you'll find all the details there about future shows. Now, the TNT show will be back next week with a special guest. We'll have Molly Scott Cato of the Green Party of England and Wales. So we'll get a view on green issues next week, not necessarily from a specifically Scottish point of view, but perhaps a more global general perspective. As always, a reminder, please to look out for Elliot Bulmer's column in the Sunday National this weekend, and you'll find it in the 7 Days supplement. That Elliot has written more books on the Constitution than anywhere else in the UK. So don't settle for any less. Read the guy who actually knows when it comes to constitutional things. Thanks again, and a good night. Join us next Wednesday. And remember, it's been a great day for British democracy. It seems that North Sea oil is to be fully exploited. Now, this is an extraordinary recovery in its fortunes, as we were assured in 2014 that it was almost fully exhausted. Who can tell? Now, a little message for James Cook at the BBC. Hi, James. I repeat the offer to you as the BBC's new Scotland editor to come on the show. Don't be afraid. We don't bite, as you can see tonight. Also, I'll put the question to you. How can you be Scotland editor while ignoring a show that gets sometimes a bigger audience than some BBC shows? Please get in touch, James. To all of you, thanks for joining us. Stay safe, take care. Support the crowdfunder, please. Thanks in advance. See you all next week. Take care. Stay safe. Good night, everyone.